Welcome back to the Fourth and Long podcast for the 2020 COVID special. We're looking forward to this season. Glad it's back. We missed talking to you guys. The draft was really good. We'll get into that in a second. But there's one guy here, and he'll be talking right away because COVID didn't get him. Randy Fast, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing pretty good. Yeah, I managed to survive it. Glad you guys did too. A couple guys were missing at the draft that we were worried about, but hey, looks like we're all here, and that's good because you guys can put all that money in the pot, and I'll take the trophy home in the season.
Well, hey, speaking of trophies, new trophy to the league, as we all know, the itch. Just want to again thank you for the work you did on that. I know Devil Raiders has probably got that on the mantle as we speak, getting ready to tune in tomorrow to our first episode of the 2020 season. So, lots happened in the off season. Obviously, lots happened. Week one, especially ups and downs. Downs for me. But hey, we got lots of topics. We're going to do stuff a little different this year. We're going to think of some topics that might have come up from what we've seen throughout the week. Not necessarily maybe stat line reiterating to you guys. We're just going to kind of speak freely. So if there's a lot of uhs and ahs and we just sound like baffling idiots, let us know. But we're looking forward to trying this method. So here we go. Randy, one of our first topics we want to talk about because there was a lot of hype around this kid. We know Clueless took him with the first overall pick in our draft, Clyde's Edward Alaire. But really, the topic is how does he really change the dynamic of the Chiefs' offense and what does he bring there? So I'll let you kind of take the lead on this one, and that's kind of the topic question we'll propose here.
Yeah, this is something that a lot of people were obviously wondering about, being a really good rookie, on a national championship team coming out of college, and then going straight into the highest powered offense the league has seen in a couple of years, I think. And yeah, would that change much, especially when the Coach Reed sure loves throwing the ball. I think there was a stat there on Thursday night that said they threw the ball like 60% of the time or something, which is crazy, and that was something like the highest total that a Super Bowl champion had ever had. Uh, but now you've got a young dynamic running back that you can feed the ball to, and boy, I'm just looking at some of the stats. He had 25 rushes. Now, of course, being up early, they obviously fed him a bit later on, but that wasn't all garbage points. He was fed the ball quite regularly and did very well. 138 yards and a touchdown. Did not catch any balls, so that is one good thing as far as the offense goes, because as we know, that offense revolves around Patrick Mahomes and these many receivers that they have out there. And fantasy wise, especially focuses around Mahomes because Mahomes is a keeper worthy quarterback, or at least according at least in this league, he was considered that. Obviously, guys like Travis Kelsey, Tyreek Hill are the main guys who benefit from Mahomes and his ability. So it's the kind of situation where there is only one ball to go around, and would it affect the fantasy value of some of these players? Now, personally, from my point of view, Travis Kelsey, it doesn't affect him because he is one of those tight ends, kind of like my boy Jason Witten being Tony Romo's safety blanket. When a quarterback trusts a tight end to the level that these guys do, they don't ever really go away from them. They are going to be big on third downs. They're going to be big in the red zone. So you might see a couple less targets a game, but you're going to see those red zone ones, and that's the ones that get you the points. Tyreek Hill is still a deep threat. They're still going to go deep because they don't want defenses crowding the box to stop the run. So he's going to be dangerous. Sammy Watkins, I would think would take a hit, but at least on Thursday he didn't take a hit. He had the most receptions, the most yards, and he got himself a touchdown as well. And that wasn't all just on one play. So I think it's the secondary receivers like the Robinsons and the Hardmans. Those are going to be the guys that their fantasy value will go down. But as long as this team continues to 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 just be in all these shootouts, and as long as Mahomes can still throw the ball a lot, I don't think Clyde Edwards-Helaire will make that much of a dent in the rest of the team's offense. In fact, it may even help it.
Yeah, no, and you bring up a lot of very, very good points regarding that particular offense. You bring up a point about you didn't feel it would affect Travis Kelsey's fantasy value production. I would almost look at it, and maybe I'm just again coming off that week one loss biased, in my opinion, but you look at Kelsey. Just a quick question, and then just flip it back to me. Do you think Kelsey is going to be utilized more as a blocking tight end to allow this rookie running back to continue to do what he do? What do you think about that?
Uh, I think he will a little bit. I mean, you definitely want him to be blocking, not because he's a great blocker or anything, but because you don't want teams to tailor their strategy around, is Kelsey in the block or is he in receiving? You're going to want to hide that fact. So he's going to line up the block and then slip out for short plays like that. So that's kind of my thought around that. I don't think so, but again, you do bring up a good point.
So
If,
yeah,
if he's blocking, he might get hurt more, stuff like that. So yeah, you do bring up a good point as far as the blocking part of it goes.
and to further the point, what will happen here is once Clyde Edwards-Helaire, if he does get going and they establish that run game, as we all know, what does that open up? It opens up play action, which obviously increases Patrick Mahomes' stats. It would increase all those guys you previously mentioned in the wide receiver core. My concern is now that they have a running back, is this going to turn into that type of team where it's like, well, I got to get Tyreek Hill, I got to get Kelsey, I have to have that running. I'll even take a third, fourth, fifth wideout option on that team. But it's almost like getting to that point again of where the fantasy value is being spread too much, where they're almost not dependent enough like they used to be. So with that, it becomes an interesting dilemma here. You look at Clueless, for example. He has Clyde Edwards and Travis Kelsey. Of course, you want to be a part of that offense, but like I say, I'd be curious to see because the example I was referring to was Waller in Oakland or Vegas, sorry, and Josh Jacobs. When they got down to the red zone, Waller was usually the target. Now they let Jacobs run in for a few. I know it's only week one, but we have to have the discussion. And that's my concern with Travis Kelsey was such a good stretch in the field. He's a big guy. You can just lob the ball up in the red zone. Are they going to start looking at it and go, hey, Kelsey, why don't you block for this kid because he's legit and we'll just run him in? So I'd be curious to see. I'd like to revisit this conversation maybe halfway through the season to see if any of those fantasy values change for any of those guys.
Yeah, exactly. I would like to see a bigger sample size too, especially with Sammy Watkins, because, well, like I said, you expect him to take a hit because he's the second wide receiver, and he is, well, he's been injured on and off the last few years, but he had the most receptions and the most yards, so can't really fault him for the as far as that right off the bat. To your point too about end zone touches, it is a benefit that Edwards-Helaire is not a big running back. He's small. He's still powerful enough, but he's not the kind of guy that can just force his way over the goal line from the 1 yard line, right? He's the kind of guy that if he hits the hole properly, he'll get it, and if the blocking is good, which it usually is for that team. But yeah, it's the kind of thing. If it's Edwards-Helaire and a random middle linebacker meeting in the hole, I don't really see him beating him unless he takes a different angle and kind of slips underneath him or something like that. So that's one point where maybe at least on the goal line he might not be as effective as you think.
Yeah,
I want to make one other point too. I forgot to make in my first bit. There is an extremely good benefit to Edwards-Helaire running the ball as well as he had, and that's that who didn't have a single rush attempt? Patrick Mahomes. He can just sit there and throw now. It's much likely he's going to get hurt, and he's plenty mobile enough to avoid sacks and to avoid getting rolled over and stuff like that. So this could mean he's already pretty healthy, but this could mean that he could go injury free for a long time, which is huge for everyone involved in this offense.
Well, and yeah, our final point here is the Clyde Edwards, he's lowest projection value fantasy wise is week 3 when they play Baltimore. He's just under 13 points. So for the
Mm-hmm.
rest of the season, he's got a baseline of about 14 points. You know he's going to tack on a TD, probably above that, and to what again going to be interesting to your points that you made earlier, and then we'll kind of move on here is what happens if they just wanted to run this kid for the first 4 weeks, let's say, to get him used to the NFL pace. Now all of a sudden they say, hey, if we have blocking or screens, can you catch out of the backfield? Can we give you that other option? Because if he becomes that running back, those guys you previously mentioned, Herdman, Watkins, they're going to go down, and it's interesting because Sammy Watkins was on my waiver wire. Unfortunately, I didn't snag him. Devil Raiders got him. So obviously, guys are looking at this team. It's just a matter of how long are those points going to be spread fairly.
Exactly.
So, good way to start off the 2020 season with a high-powered team defending Super Bowl champs. Lots to discuss there, and obviously everybody's got an eye on that team. We talked a lot about offense just there. Obviously, there's another side of the ball, defense. One of the other topics we were talking off air was how often do fantasy owners look at the defense they have, and what does that do when your defense plays your roster spots? So what we kind of look at here is when you have a defense, are you hitting the waiver wire? Are you looking at trades when it comes to, well, my defense is playing my quarterback. I got to switch one of the two. Or what happens if my defense is playing a tight end? Do I really care that much? Randy, where's your head at with that subject?
Well, my head at that, uh, I guess the short answer is I'm very concerned about things like that. Maybe not so much for a tight end, depending on who your tight end is. I didn't have. I guess I believe I had Mark Edwards last year towards the end of the year, but if you have Travis Kelsey, Zach Ertz, any of these great tight ends, then you got to worry about it because that guy is expected to get. He's expected to be an advantage. He's expected to be something that you can gain an advantage over the opponents. But if you just have a middle of the road or a low end tight end, don't worry about that one. If they catch them, just hope that they get yards because most of the time that's what they're getting anyways. And 50 yards does for a tight end does not necessarily hurt your defense if they're not scoring points.
For
Now,
sure.
with that being said, as everyone who remembers the draft knows, I drafted two defenses. Now that's mostly for bye weeks, but I do look at picking up defenses off the waiver. Mostly, I look at a favorable matchup for a defense when I pick it up. But the reason why I'm picking up is a lot of, like you said, I don't really want my defense to play my quarterback because you really don't want either of those. It's not like a kicker or like we said a tight end where you don't care if that player doesn't get a lot of points. It's always very nice to have your defense do well, and your defense is one of the few players on your roster that can cost you negative points if they play really poorly. And obviously, your quarterback is like usually worth 20% of your points, so you need him to do well. So yeah, that's my long answer, my long version to the answer. I'm very worried about that sort of thing, and I try to plan for it.
Well, and yeah, and the reason we also look at this is, I mean, just for example, I know a lot of people had interesting defensive matchups throughout the week. I kind of got myself into a pickle without even knowing it until the draft was over, and obviously you go to set your lineups come week 1, and I'm like, man, drafted Baltimore's defense. I feel comfortable about that. They should be pretty good this year. And then I look at week 1 and they're playing the Browns. Divisional game. Baltimore played good against, Cleveland played good against Baltimore last year. Nick Chubb should be pretty good. I wasn't confident in OBJ, but he's still, there's something there. And then I look at it and I go, okay, but now I have two Browns players versus my defense. So if they both tee off, this defense is going to get shredded. But you can't not play Baltimore defense. they're one of the top ranked defenses in the league. Now, again, to your point with the quarterback and your stat percentages, had it been Ben Roethlisberger, who I played, had he been playing Baltimore, I got to make a decision, right? Probably going to play a different quarterback because I don't have two defenses. But with Nick Chubb, for example, with a running back, you can still run up and down the field for 4 quarters. He can still get 130 yards and no touchdowns, and
Right.
that doesn't affect my defense's value at all. Wide receivers, they can, well, any other roster spot outside of the quarterback, you can still catch the ball up and down the field, and it's not going to affect your defense. When your defense all of a sudden sacks your quarterback, it's like, yeah, oh, I'm gaining points or I get interceptions, but your quarterback's losing points. So I think guys got to be careful. If your quarterback is playing your defense, you basically are handcuffing yourself, and you'd have to look at an option to either switch out the quarterback or look at the defense. And I know sometimes those matchups are never really favorable. It's easy to do now because the waiver wire is out there, and nobody's on a bye. Everybody can play. But when and this is going to lead us into a subject down the episode here. But once bye weeks come around, what we're talking about here is stuff guys need to start preparing for, because you don't want to be in position where your roster might be on the bye for 3-4 spots, and now you got guys playing against each other.
Yeah, exactly. And as much as the waiver wire is valuable for that, it also starts at the draft. If you have a good deep talent pool as far as your wide receivers and running backs, right? Like, it's actually kind of a good thing to, to always be guessing who's gonna, who to start as your second wide receiver or your second running back, who to start in the flex, because that means that when a situation like this happens, you can easily plug in someone from the bench and say, well, you know what, they'll probably do just as good as as my running back playing the Baltimore defense, and yeah, you can be confident in that.
For sure. So, moving on to a position we just spoke about with a lot of percentages, a lot of stats. Obviously, QBs in fantasy aren't necessarily your top picks, but they do play an important role on your team. And as we know, this offseason had a lot of quarterback, a lot of big names switching teams. Obviously, the season started; they had their debuts. Some won, some lost, as so is sports. But let's take a look at some of the quarterbacks on their new teams and how we thought they fared. In fantasy wise and obviously in general, but obviously some of the big names here: Tom Brady, Cam Newton, Philip Rivers, Teddy Bridgewater. The list can kind of go on here. Anybody stick out to you happy? I know you got one guy who who didn't look good, but where are you at with that? Where do you rank these guys? Who'd you like?
Yeah, so, well, like you alluded to, and who you mentioned, the first name you mentioned, Tom Brady, and obviously was the big news maker, finding a new team and finding a new team with some weapons on it. So people were pretty excited about that. Uh, Again, not a great start to it, as most people saw. Didn't get the win. Didn't get into quite the shootout I was hoping it would be. Although the Saints defense is pretty good, so you got to give credit for that. At least he got a couple touchdowns to kind of save the day, but he was still around. He got me 24.96, so give it 25 points. That's not terrible, but that's not elite either. Uh, but at least in general, and this is probably going to be true for almost all of these, even the rookie guys like Joe Burrow and stuff like that. These guys, they're on new teams, new coaches, new offensive coordinators, new receivers, new offensive line, the whole shebang. And as much as a lot of people like to say we don't need the preseason because most of the starters only play a half in like the third game or something like that, it's best to make those mistakes in the first half of the third game than to make those mistakes in the first half of week one when everybody's counting on them. However, that doesn't mean that I'm going to be bailing on any of these guys, especially Tom Brady. And my reasoning for that, specifically with Brady, is that I think he came to Florida, to Tampa Bay specifically, to have some fun, play for a pro quarterback coach like Bruce Arians, and to throw some balls to some really good wide receivers, and to and to bring his buddy Gronk over to kind of help him out, although he didn't throw very often to Gronk, but he's also new to the team and has been away from football for a while, so I'm okay with slowly bringing him in. Uh, I did notice, because I watched that game very closely, that Brady did try a lot of long balls. There were a couple of pass interference ones in which the ball was put right on the money. The guy was just interfered with, so that's positive for me. The fact that Brady wants to throw deep, he wants to have some fun throwing the ball. I'm kind of seeing shades of maybe of those Randy Moss days when he was breaking breaking touchdown records, and I'm hoping that sort of thing happens again. I'm hoping for that to happen.
Well, it'll be interesting. I mean, you look at fantasy wise, because that's the main reason why we do this. All those guys we mentioned who are on new teams, and it's not like half the league switch, but a lot of them. Tom Brady would be your first guy who switched a team who is in the rankings. He's still outside the top 10 for fantasy. Guys like
Mm-hmm.
Kirk Cousins, Kyler Murray, Mitchell Trubisky, Josh Allen, they were all ahead of these guys.
Mm-hmm.
Mitchell Trubisky is only owned in 3%. He's rostered 3% of all fantasy leagues in Yahoo, and he finished fifth in fantasy points for quarterbacks in week one. From a guy who I didn't even think he was going to get the job over Nick Foles. So, but to your point, a lot of these guys go to new teams. There's a lot to get used to. Different weapons. Tom Brady's always played with slot receivers, in my opinion. Julian Edelman. The only really stretch guy he had was Randy Moss. So he's got two stretch guys on that field in Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. Yes, Mike Evans had a bit of a hamstring issue. You mentioned Gronk; he's fairly new to that. But again, you look at it, and it goes back to Mike Kelsey argument. Gronk is being used as a blocking tight end because OJ Howard caught the tight end, the touchdown, not Gronk. They were using Gronk a lot. I mean, they're gonna get those guys back in shape too. But enough about Tom Brady. You can keep going down the list. Cam Newton. I thought his jersey name wasn't long enough. It should have been Cam Newton, Michelle White Burkhead, because
Mm-hmm.
he ran more than those guys.
Yeah.
Typical Belichick fashion. Uh, Except it was the quarterback who was doing the running this time. He had 75 rush yards with two touchdowns, which scares me a bit because I have James White and Cam Newton, and I just don't know. Like, if I play James White, is Cam Newton going to snake the red zone touchdowns? Because that's the type of quarterback Cam is. So look for Belichick to use that in those red zone options because Tom Brady never had that ability. That's why
Mm-hmm.
all those guys would get the passing touchdowns.
Right.
Continuing down, Philip Rivers lost to Jacksonville, but still put up 363 yards. So guys are going to do interesting. It'll be curious to see how it pans out throughout the year. I wish my quarterback from the Giants went to a different team, but we're not there yet, I guess. So we'll have to wait and see what transpires there. But yeah, no, that's a very interesting point, and a lot of those guys are taken on teams. So obviously, guys still value them even though they got traded into new systems. So nothing to really be afraid of fantasy wise. And I just want to point out that Ryan, or Global Warming, had three of the top 10 fantasy getting quarterbacks on his roster: Josh Allen, Kyler Murray, Matt Ryan. Good job, Ryan. I guess you can only play one, but it's good to know you have three. And good luck. He had a big week, so obviously he knows what he's doing. So, yeah, quarterback changes. Speaking of changes, we all love that Wednesday morning, 2:30. If you're up, you heard your phone go bzzz because the waiver wires started coming in.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting to see that we draft. Everybody loves your team at the draft. You ask any GM, I love my team. Not, it's good. I feel good about it. I feel good about it. And then Sunday rolls around, and we're praying to the gods. We're ready to shut off the phone. It hadn't even started yet. And the topic here is, how soon do you hit the panic button? How soon do you hit the waiver wire? Or, as global warming likes to do, send trades every 5 minutes. So, how soon is too soon hitting the waiver wire and starting trades, Randy?
Uh, as well, I guess the first thing to say about that, I did think of one exception to that rule of everybody likes their team they drafted. I think Nigel of Misfits is the only guy I've heard actually be somewhat honest when he didn't like a draft. I didn't get his opinion this year. He had to take off before I got a chance to ask him. But I know the year before he wasn't too happy with it, and he didn't do very well in the standings, so he was right about that. But it was refreshing to see honesty because, like you said, everybody is just kind of, you're kind of on a high from the draft, and yeah, and you think every draft was great, and most everyone has a couple of good picks, or at least in theory, a couple of good picks. Like everyone has some head shakers at some points, but you never know. But yeah, as far as the waiver wire goes, uh, a lot of it might depend on injuries. A lot of it might depend on you know different information that comes up. If you all of a sudden see that like you had mentioned you didn't think Trubisky would beat out Foles. If Foles beats out Trubisky for the starting spot in Week 1, does that change other people? Do other people want to take a chance on him? Uh, I know in normal years that is something that sometimes, especially with the committee, you want to see who does the best out of or a running back committee or even a wide receiver committee. You want to see who does the best out of training camp. You want to see who starts Week 1, who has the best Week 1. So mostly it's just for tweaking purposes. Um, Trades, I think, are more common earlier, and this isn't always the scenario, but uh, some sometimes you hear guys, they'll be drafting stuff and they'll be like, oh look, oh, I never noticed I have three wide receivers with the same bye week. Well, now those guys have to try to trade, and you may as well get on that boat and trade them early then. Uh, and some guys just want feelers out there. Uh, you can do a trade whenever you want. Unless I have injury trouble, or unless a bunch of my draft picks like aren't starting Week 1 or something, or they're losing or they're losing touches because of someone else coming in or something like that. Unless it's an absolute disaster, I probably won't really, I probably won't consider any trades until like Week 4, maybe. Once the bye weeks start to come in, I start looking at stuff like that. It obviously depends on how I'm doing. If I'm 500, then I'm like still feeling good. But I'm also been conservative about that. I don't like trades until I've seen for sure how good or bad my team is.
No, for sure, and I think you bring up a lot of good points there. I mean, your one comment though, which is I'm going to give you a number here, and you said most guys are kind of conservative or it's a tweak, right? You're trying to, hey, that didn't really pan out Week 1 or whatever. Our first waiver week, this league had 9 moves, so there was 9 transactions. Only one guy is questionable. Every other guy was healthy. So it's not even really holy fuck, I'm jammed up waiver like injury wise. Obviously guys have bench already, but
Right.
we had 9 transactions already off the waiver wire. So obviously, between the 9, there was one, two, three, 7 GMs who made the moves.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I'd be very interested to see historically what those numbers are, because this was the first year we did a live draft, and I wonder if some some fringe players might have got missed because guys might not have had you know might not have put them down for notes, or or didn't think about them later. I know there were a few mistakes at the draft where some guys were picking like, oh wait, he's injured, that guy's suspended, or that, oh, that guy's still a free agent. Like, yeah, like there were a couple mistakes like that. So certainly those would be waiver pickups. And like, this guy's useless for me the whole year. So I may as well drop him and pick someone else up as soon as the waiver opens.
yeah,
So
for
it'd be very interesting to see, um, and and then also to see in future years when guys get a little more used to the big spectacle of the live draft, that we'll see if the drafting improves in the years to come, because this was the first time we've done this.
yeah, and that is a very good point. I know a lot of guys were like, well, how do I access this? And it's like, well, you had to come prepared. And oh, okay, yeah. And if you didn't really have numbers or lists of players, to your point, a lot of the guys you might have missed or been like, man, I should have stashed that guy. Oh crap, he's still free. Okay, well, first waiver go around, I got to pick him up, right? And and to your point, bye weeks don't start till week 4. So who cares if you use two moves each week for the first 4 weeks? You can kind of tweak, you can play, see what you
Mm-hmm.
like. But once the bye weeks come around, this is the other half of the question here in regards to trades and waivers is once those bye weeks come around, you really need to start looking ahead. The waiver wire plays a huge
Yeah.
role, as we all know, and if you're smart about it, even if you don't need anybody and you still had a move or two moves, you might as well get it out of the way looking forward to next week's matchups before Sunday starts because you can claim a guy before Sunday.
Yeah.
So if you claim them and stash them, yeah, you used your moves and hopefully nothing last second happens. But now you're kind of prepared moving into the bye week where you technically have another two moves and you're not waiting till that last second and jamming yourself up like everybody else. Once bye weeks come, you're not the only guy with players from Kansas City on the bye week, right? So yeah, it's just interesting how fast guys look to hit the waivers. There hasn't really been outside of one a major in-season trade yet, but most guys want to give their rosters a few weeks. I think you can't really start jumping ship just yet, even though there's a few people I'd like to move, and I'm sure other GMs as well. It's like, man, that didn't go as well as I thought it did, but I think it's a little early to press the panic button. But we'll see. You never know when that pending transaction comes across our phones, and a couple guys got together and made a deal. So it's
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, the waiver wire is there for a reason in fantasy, right? And trades and the way our league's set up with the draft picks definitely makes for some entertaining, as we saw at the live draft. Oh man, okay, well I traded. It's not a big deal on paper, but when you're sitting there and watch round after round go by and you don't get to pick, now it's like
Mm-hmm.
I got some work to do. So we'll
Yeah.
see where that goes. But definitely a huge topic. We got a few minutes left here. I know we got some injuries that came across the table. Why don't you lay a few out and we can have a few moments to talk about that?
Okay. Well, obviously there were some pretty big ones. Marlon Mack, torn Achilles, done for the season. Unless you want to keep him as a keeper, you keep him. Other than that, toss him. He's done. Le'Veon Bell is a hamstring injury. He's on the IR, so that's at least 3 weeks out. Uh, Again, updates tend to come after a couple weeks. You kind of see how they're doing. Hopefully, they come up. Uh, I will ask you about one. You have Devontae Parker, correct?
I do, yes.
He has a hamstring injury. I think he's going to play through it. But you're a little more up to date with this since it's your guy. Do you have an opinion on his injury?
Well, I know there was questions about it. He's constantly going through the questionable status every day. There seems to be an update. Looks like the hamstring is probably he actually practiced yesterday, so that's good.
Mm-hmm.
That's usually a good thing when it comes to the hamstring leading into the weekend. Um, they're going to most likely, I think, play him. It's going to be a tough matchup against Baltimore, Buffalo. Sorry, but it looks like every sign I'm reading is he's on for the right track. So just a matter of how bad it tweaks early in the game, because that's exactly what happened to him in week 1, right? It was pretty early on with the hamstring. I'd like to see him play. Currently, he is not in my starting roster just because I can't do that. And as I'm talking to you now, I get an update about Mike Evans, and he's still got the questionable tag regarding his hamstring. So
Yeah.
hopefully
Yeah, but
he
he,
gets
he managed to play the whole game though
for
with
sure,
his neck injury, so
for
that
sure.
that should give him a little up over Parker.
For sure, yeah, no, and another big injury, which I'm sure you're just about to talk about, and I know that's why Devil Raiders hit the waiver wire, like we just discussed in our previous topic there. But Michael Thomas, high ankle sprain, gone for several weeks. That's gotta hurt. That is a huge weapon. He did not bad though. Just to let you know, he did not bad on the waiver wire. Valdez Scantling from the Packers and Sammy Watkins from the Chiefs. I mean, you couldn't get better wide receivers on teams at this stage in the game
Right.
with throwing quarterbacks. So good waiver pickups for Devil Raiders, but Thomas for that long, that's gonna hurt.
Yeah, especially since as we were talking, kind of preparing for the podcast earlier in the week, I kind of mentioned that it didn't look like it was going to be a problem. I think that was the word on Sunday night and Monday. Then all of a sudden we find out. like that, like like the next morning, and then you kind of mentioned to me that it looks like it's going to be much more serious, and that's when the bad news came out, and yeah, it was pretty rough. There's another big injury I want to mention as well. George Kittle, a knee sprain, looking questionable. That's a pretty high end tight end. The only thing that we don't have, or at least that doesn't have to worry about too much, is the GM that owns them is our boy Jerry, who loves that two tight end set. So he's already got a tight end stud to take his place. So it's not such a big deal for him, but obviously Kittle is basically a wide receiver playing in the tight end slot, which in fantasy is gold. So hopefully for Jerry's sake, he doesn't miss too much time.
For sure, no, and actually just doing some follow up on a couple people as well as you're talking there. George Kittle, from what I'm reading, it looks like he is either going to be very limited or they don't think they need him against the Jets. So there's a really good chance this questionable turns into doubtful because long season ahead. If you think you can get the W, what's the point of pushing a guy out there? And also to follow up with Tampa Bay, and then I'll flip it back to you. Chris Godwin looks like he's in concussion protocol. So if Mike Evans' hamstring is good, that's a good sign for myself because there'll be more targets his way. But I think the Connor role has Chris Godwin, so concussion protocol update for him. So
Yeah, and James Conner as well, sprained ankle. Uh, gonna need some more updates as the week goes along for that. And well, I guess I can also mention Philip Lindsay has turf toe, although that's a pretty mild one. He's not expected to miss any time, but that is a little something that he's going to have to fight through early on in the season. Not a great thing. Not a great thing to have to fight through.
for sure, yeah, no. So yeah, that's kind of some big fantasy names there. There's a few. Obviously, it's that time of the year again where everybody's questionable to the last frickin' second. I'd almost rather them be be doubtful, and then we can move
Yeah.
on. We can move on with our lives. But it is what it is. Obviously, you draft these guys, you want them to play. Um, but yeah, some interesting injuries. Definitely, those are kind of your for most of the names we mentioned there, Randy. Those are kind of like your wideout threes, running back, low twos, high threes. So these are kind of like your depth that are going to try to salvage that win for you. And if you take that hit, you got to look further down the bench.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully you drafted some good depth players.
All right. Well, those are kind of some of the topics we figure we'd try this year. Obviously, you guys are going to listen. Let us know what you think. If there's any other feedback or any other topics, shoot it our way. I think I like the injury update. I think obviously you guys read your own injuries, but part of this we can maybe discuss and maybe who we think would be a good idea to replace or how that is going to affect the team, and we can do maybe injury updates. Not every player because there's too many, but maybe some of the top injuries we can look at. But yeah, no, it's just good to be back talking football and watching it and going through the ups and downs throughout the fantasy week. We got a game tomorrow, as you know. Thursday nights are always exciting. Cleveland Browns, Cincinnati Bengals, like, and I'm joking here, but it's just good to have football back. Anything else you want to add before we kind of end episode 1 of 2020?
Not too much. You already mentioned about the guys can send us topics. That's about the only thing I wanted to mention. Send us some topics if you think of some good ones we can use. You never know. Might end up being the best topic if you guys send it out. So yeah, don't be afraid to let us know what you think.
All right, guys. Good luck week 2, and we'll talk to you guys next week.
Have a good one.